Hi there, this is D.I.D. Choi. It has been a short while, hasn't it? But I am back to you today with a video about Ace Studio's new AI violin. Now before we get started, a quick disclaimer, Ace Studio did send me the product to review for a month. Other than that, there have been no payments exchanged or anything like that, so I'm free to voice my own opinions about the violin, and I will be doing that. That being said, the AI violin is still in beta, and it does say right underneath the interface, expression controls coming soon. So not really sure what they want to be showing off and why they're wanting me to advertise it at this stage, but that being said, we will be focused on the potential based on my knowledge of the company and what they do with their vocal side of things. I'm sure you've seen ads for their vocal AI, and also with my knowledge of string sampling, violin, etc. Alright, so we'll dive in here. When you open up the app, you get a nice interface. You have a voice, you have a place for audio tracks, but right now we want to focus on the AI violin. And to do that, you might have probably this menu come up, but we'll go into AI instrument. As you can see, it is labeled beta. What we'll do is we'll come in here, we'll select the violin. You can see it adds a new track. And you can also see that the information is, this is created by a guy named Gabriel Bach. It is his violin playing that they've used to train this AI, so they have the license to use it, and it's all legit and stuff. And theoretically, he also gets a cut from all of their sales. You can also see that there are two other violins, Vintage Violin 1 and Vintage Violin 2. From my experience, the one is a bit of a bright violin, although it's not quite as clear as Gabriel's violin. Vintage 2 is a bit softer, almost has kind of like a concertino kind of quality. It's a little silkier and darker in general. Finally, they also have an option for ensemble mode. So if I load in, say, Gabriel's violin onto this track right here, I can also add more violins. I can drag and drop these other ones, the vintage. I have two Gabriels. And by stacking and with their offset and spread algorithms, they're able to adjust and make it sound like there's four violins playing. Well, it is four violins playing in their model, but it'll sound more like an ensemble. And you might have seen this with their vocals where they do it with the choirs. They stack a bunch of their trained vocals and create a choir, which is really cool. And I've heard some pretty good results. So theoretically, if they start adding more instruments, you see here it says more instruments coming soon, want to collaborate. If you pass their test, you can have your own D.I.D. Choi violin model. So in the future, when they have more violins trained up, maybe you can have a nice symphonic section of 8, 12, or 16 violins even. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, create a clip here. And you can see that you get a nice MIDI roll view. Let's create my favorite melody for demos, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Twinkle, twinkle. Oops, wrong note. That's okay, we can fix that later. You can right click to deselect out of that pencil mode. And I'm just going to drag these out to full length quarter notes. Let's add a half note here. Half note here. All right, so you'll see this little gray thing here. If I press play, you'll see it blink. Playback is about to start. If I press play again to stop that, you can see that AI is rendering. And what's happening here is rather than processing these samples on your computer using your resources and your RAM, what they're doing is they're processing on the cloud and basically sending you an audio rendering of what they've processed. So let's listen to what happened here. Forgot to change that. Okay, you can see now that I've changed that, they are re-rendering. I need to press play to actually start the rendering. And this is to indicate that this section needs rendering. Play to start. Playback is about to start. Let me press play again to stop it. Play it at the start. Nice. So we have Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It sounds like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It sounds like a solo violin. Great. Now, what about my dynamic controls? In the beta, that does not exist. As you can see, expression controls coming soon, which tells me what is the point of this then, right? And I am a little confused at first too, not sure what they really want to show off, but having said that, their rendering of articulations is pretty good depending on the length of the note. And I have a couple example tracks for you that will show you more in depth what I'm talking about, and some ways to actually make this sound good. So rather than coming in and drawing everything in by hand, it's going to be a lot easier to import some kind of MIDI. So I'm going to go ahead and import some MIDI that I've already made. Easiest way is to just drag and drop. Do I want to import time signature and tempos? Yes. So this is Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto, a very, very famous piece for violin. And if you want to say you're making the one and done violin plugin, this is definitely a good stress test. So just to let you know about my process here, I imported a MIDI file into Dorico of the work, and I matched the dynamics and slurs so that we have the right amount of note overlap and the right note velocities. I also got a recording of Joshua Bell playing the Violin Concerto and tempo mapped it in Logic Pro. You can actually check out a video of me explaining how to tempo map in Logic and get some rubato techniques going. But as you can see, we have a very, very crazy tempo map here. The reason I did that is because I wanted to give A Studios all the chances they have. A lot of the demos that they've released so far and other YouTubers have created are kind of stressing the plug and play aspect of the plugin, where they plug in some MIDI, give you the results, show you what that is. While that is very informative, I'm not super interested in that. I'm more interested in how good can it sound in an actual mix. That basically means I'm giving it everything I got to make it sound good in a reasonable amount of time, and for me that included adding in some rubato and some humanization features that will make it at least a little bit more realistic, especially when we don't have the factor of expression controls. So back in A Studios, some things I've noticed that you'll have to check for is making sure all the notes that you want connected to be actually connected. So that might mean putting things over. You can also command click and drag, and that gives you finer controls regardless of the grid that you've set. I have found that in A Studio, if your notes overlap, you get a nice legato. If they just miss each other, you get a nice detached but smooth sound. And if you have notes that are disconnected, they will be détaché. Again, once you make changes, you have to press play to get the AI rendering started. You'll have to wait for that for a moment. You can see that it's processing the entire line right now, I think, almost. Okay, it's finished this chunk. It's moved on to the next chunk, which means I can play this back. Let's see. Okay, interesting. I'm going to move on to the section with a lot of dotted phrases. And this is kind of where A Studio shines, because those short notes sound like good bow bouncy short notes rather than kind of those sample short notes where you have a choice of spiccato, staccato, something longer, tenuto, marcato, whatever, portato, depending on the library you have, which basically just triggers that one sample, or, 7 samples, depending on how many round robins, but it basically triggers that one articulation, while this AI actually takes into account the note and the context of the notes around it, giving it a much more natural sounding short articulation that doesn't jump out from everything else as much. So I'll go ahead, tweak this a bit, and come up with a demo, and we can listen to it together. So from my tweaking, a couple of things that I've noticed that I want to point out, you definitely want to go ahead and find any double, triple, quadruple stops in the work and make sure that they're played arpeggiated the way that they're supposed to be played. So for example, right here we have blum, blum. There's no way an actual violinist is playing those 3 notes at the same time. So while I have already arpeggiated the chord here, what we need is for this to be reduced because they're going to be grazing the D string and arpeggiating up to the other notes. So wait for that to re-render, of course. So this will take a bit of time to go across, make sure everything's sounding right, everything's sounding natural. The double stops, triple stops, quadruple stops are timed and expressed kind of in the right place temporally. The other thing I've noticed is that velocities don't really matter at the moment. There's no independent velocity control for any of these notes, and the velocity that was already in the MIDI doesn't seem to really be affecting the performance at all. So, what we'll do now is I will play you the demo of the piece, and we'll be hearing it in a couple different ways. First of all, I'll play it raw straight out of Studio, and then I'll play you a processed version and a couple comparisons to other similar libraries that will give you an idea of whether this is good or not, how it compares to existing sample libraries, existing solutions, and also the real thing. We can also listen to Joshua Bell playing at the end. And now with some processing, here I've taken the gain plugin in Logic Pro and just did a little bit of volume automation because the lack of dynamics just doesn't balance with the orchestra quite right. So a little bit of dynamic things just with a gain plugin, nothing with the actual sound of the plugin itself. And I also added a little bit of Berlin Studio reverb on top of it to place it in a hall. And this is it processed. Wow, so that was actually pretty impressive. With a little bit of reverb and a little bit of gain control, that created a pretty good performance that, if you are familiar with any sampled solo violins, you're not going to get that kind of agility and that kind of versatility coming out of your instrument, especially with this low amount of effort, right? I basically imported the MIDI, did a little bit of tweaking, but nothing crazy with articulations and going between different types of shorts and blah, 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 just a little bit of changing the length of notes and making sure things overlap the way I wanted it to, and then a little bit of gain automation. So once we get the expression controls, this is pretty promising. Obviously, right now it's not anywhere near a real violin, and you can still hear these weird artifacts that I'm sure come from the AI modeling and the training. You can also hear these kind of weird intonation problems, some of these without the expression control, it just doesn't sound quite as musical. Although some of these phrasing things that the AI is doing is pretty good. Like it's tapering the end of notes, it's swelling into some other notes. But without any like manual expression control tweaking, it's not quite there yet. But for the sake of comparison, I will be playing you the same passage using Spitfire solo violin fed through Noteperformer's Playback engine, which has unfortunately been discontinued, but I still have access to mine because I didn't update. So this is just coming from Dorico now, playing straight from Dorico. I imported the stems into Logic, but no processing on the violin itself. This is just Spitfire solo violin played through the Playback engines of Noteperformer. So it's very much a kind of plug and play thing. I'm not doing any tweaking to the MIDI at all. And everything's just being interpreted from the slurs, articulations, dynamics within Dorico's score. And finally, the actual performance from Joshua Bell. Hey everyone, quick heads up. After finishing making this video about Ace Studio, they actually reached out and offered something special to you all. If you're interested in checking it out, there's an exclusive download link and a 5% discount for members of my audience. And to be clear, I did finish making the rest of the video before recording this portion, and all my final thoughts were made before this offer was given to me. So take advantage of this 5% discount, and you guys can sign up for Ace Studio. So that's astudio.ai/promo equals D.I.D. Choi, with the discount code D.I.D. Choi. The way the pricing works is there is a rent-to-own function and a permanent buy option with 2 different tiers, and they all have different aspects to them, so you guys can choose what you'd like, and you can always upgrade to the pro version with the price difference. Now back to the video. Now we're going to check out one other piece that is very, very important to the solo violin repertoire, and if we're going to be testing out solo violin, we want to be stress testing and seeing what it can actually do. So we're going to be taking a look at Bach's Violin Sonata in G minor. And violinists work their entire lives tweaking the expression and the musicality that they can have for this piece, not to mention intonation, timing, phrasing, and all that, to get this piece to perfection. So this is really going to highlight any of the shortcomings and any advantages with this instrument, and most likely emphasize the need for dynamic control. Come on, this should be released already. Alright, so same thing here. I downloaded the MIDI on the internet, fed it into Dorico, fed it into Logic, tempo mapped a violin performance by the legendary Hilary Hahn, fed that back into Dorico, out into AStudio, and now we have a nice violin performance. Of course, I adjusted some of the MIDI, especially the double and quadruple and triple stops here. Like the first note of the piece is always jump. They're playing the lower two strings and the upper two strings most of the time. Depending on the violinist, their interpretation might be different. I did everything I could to mimic the timing and performance that Hilary gave in her performance. Obviously, there's going to be discrepancies, especially in the dynamics, because I have no control over that. But here it is. So again, as you can see, expression controls coming soon. Now, because AStudio already has a very robust system for their vocals, let's actually take a look at what they have. As you can see in their piano roll for vocals, there are so many more options. You can deal with the kind of vibrato between notes. You can go into whether you need more breath, air. If you want to go into falsetto, add more tension, more energy, change the format. So I expect that with the violin and the expression controls to come, there's got to be some kind of way to talk about dynamics, string crossing, bow pressure, bow speed, vibrato speed, amount, the delay before a vibrato starts, whether you're using an open string or not, talking about string crossing and positions, some kind of tone parameter, whether you want a section to be more on the heavy side, more on the dark side, on light side. Maybe you want the tone to be more round in this section. Stuff that violin players are always thinking about. Sol tasto, sol ponticello, other kinds of bow position things, flautando. Obviously, we need more support for harmonics, pizzicatos, different types of articulations that are very common. I would like to see some kind of trill support because in the Bach piece, you can see that I had some manually drawn out trills. This is just me in the piano roll manually adding one note at a time. If they had some kind of built-in trill support, that would be very helpful, especially if we're using ensembles because not everyone in the ensemble is going to be playing the trill exactly the same way, obviously. So seeing some kind of function that will deal with trills would be really awesome. I'm sure the same thing will apply to tremolos, whether it's between two different notes or on the same note. I would also really love to see some kind of accent controls. I guess this could be done with velocity, where we can map out how much a note is going to be accented or leaned into, whether it's a bit of a tenuto push or a straight up bam accent or even a marcato. I would also love to hear less artifacting. You can hear, like in a mix, if it's buried with a bunch of other things, like the Tchaikovsky example, you might not notice the artifacting as much, but with something like this solo violin piece with Bach, where everything's super exposed and you're really tuned into the way the violin sounds, you're going to want less of that artifacting. So all of those things are kind of things that I really want to happen and that I kind of expect from A Studio because of the way they've been handling their vocals so well. And with all of those parameters, I'm sure we'll get a very much better sound, and it might actually be more useful than some sample violins and might save a lot more time too. Now, some cool improvements that I would like to have that aren't completely necessary might be some kind of rubato control. So even if you're playing within the click, some kind of humanization thing where, it might add a little bit of push and pull using its AI training, of course, and analyzing how actual players might handle rubato. I'm sure a lot of you guys will have a lot more improvements that you really want that will determine if this is worth your time or if it's just not quite there for you yet. So make sure to let me know what you think in the comments. So obviously this still needs a lot of improvement. It is still in beta, as they say, so full disclaimer. But I am very interested in the potential. Once you get the sound rendered out, it actually sounds quite violin-like in some places, and depending on the context, it works really well, and it saves a lot of time too. If I had to create this mock-up just using the MIDI file, going into Logic, and dealing with all the traditional solo violin sampled stuff, I would be sitting here with key switches, articulation sets, making sure I'm getting the right short for the right note, trying to take the velocity down on certain notes because it just doesn't match the articulation that's right next to it. It would take a lot of work. This only took me maybe like half an hour to get used to the software, learn about how it handles legato and shorts and stuff, and then tweak everything to my liking. So, as an innocent senator from Naboo once said,
"We will watch your career with great interest."
So I'm very excited to see with all the expression controls just how good this violin might get in the future and the future of AI. Recently, if you guys are familiar with Noteperformer and notation programs, you might have heard that Noteperformer came out with this insane thing that integrates VST3 plugins, so you can have your favorite sample libraries played through the Noteperformer system in the form of playback engines. But in the next update, they took that down because the VST3 people were not happy with how things were being handled, and because, in my opinion, it sounded quite good. I was able to get cinematic studio strings, Berlin winds, Spitfire solo strings, and percussion, everything that I often use in my template running in Dorico with very, very little RAM. And I am very upset that they took that down and kind of went back on that, and I'm not updating my Noteperformer until that either comes back or maybe never. Something that Arnie Wallander was saying is that, maybe because AI is on the rise and they're going to be taking over at some point, he's going to be exploring different avenues of expanding Noteperformer, and maybe that leaves behind the world of sampling. We are at a big crossroads, and we don't know what the implications are for the future and how AI is going to be driving the music community. But this AI violin does show a lot of promise and it's very interesting. And I'm very grateful for A Studio for providing me with a license so that I could test it out and see what's happening at the forefront. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff to support and show your love. I'm very sorry I haven't been posting a lot of videos recently. It's just been very busy for me. Hopefully I can come back, but thank you for showing your support. And thank you to all the subscribers that subscribed since the last video, because it has been a while, but you guys just keep coming. So hopefully I can make more good content for you guys. This has been D.I.D. Choi, and I will see you in the next one.